All right, welcome to today's lesson on arborist knots and techniques and applications. I want to first apologize. My voice got a chest cold that I developed over last week, so I have a voice for radio. So we're going to go over arborist knots. First thing you might want to ask is, or a question you might have is, what's an arborist? Arborist is somebody who takes care of trees, tree care worker. You might see them climbing, doing some pruning work, possibly removing a tree in a neighborhood. That's when arborists will have some time to do some hands-on stuff, and later on we'll go outside and do some hands-on climbing techniques after we do our practice in class. So first, let's look at our learning objectives for this lesson. We're going to understand the purpose of essential arborist knots, why they're important. Identify when to use a Blake's hitch, figure eight, and a bowline knot. That's the three that we're going to work on today. We're going to evaluate knot choices for specific arborist scenarios. Each knot that we go over today has a specific purpose and why we use it. And you're going to demonstrate tying techniques for each knot. You'll have a chunk of rope in the class, and you'll get to practice tying each one of these knots. Okay, introduction. So we look at knots for tree work or arborist work. These are the essential ones that we are going to talk today on. Most of it's climbing, rigging, and safety. Safety is super important. If we're unable to do this work safely, it's going to cause injury, possible death. So following instructions, checking out these knots before you use them, and looking at your gear is essential. Arborist must master the fundamentals of knot tying. If you're ever to be a certified arborist, state of South Dakota, or a tree worker climber specialist, you have to be tested on a lot of arborist techniques, and some of it is on safety equipment and knot tying to ensure that you are being safe. Okay, why knots matter? Okay, they're critical for load bearing and safety. Load bearing meaning if you're to tie one of these ropes onto a limb that you might be rigging over a house or a sidewalk or even a power line, you need to know the knot that you're using will be able to handle the load of that branch or log or even yourself. Using some knots we use, the Blake hitch is for climbing movement. That's how we're going to move ourselves up into the tree, descend ourselves down out of the tree, and work our way through it safely. The knot's also for securing equipment, whether it be a chainsaw or you're securing your climbing harness to the rope, and lowering branches during removal. That'll be the bowline that we'll look at today. And also we have emergency scenarios, meaning if there is a climber that has an accident up in a tree, what knots would you use to try to lower that person down to safety? Okay, here's our essential arborist knots. First one we're going to have is the Blake's hitch. This is your climbing knot. This is the one that is used, a basic climbing knot. It's used by a lot of people. That is the knot that you see at the top of this slide right there. It is a friction hitch type of knot, and we'll go over that a little bit more. Figure eight knot, that's the one at the very bottom. We'll go over the uses of the figure eight knot and why it's used for arborists. And we have our bowline knot, which is the one showing the animation there, and why a bowline knot is important. First, let's look at our Blake's hitch. It is a friction hit. It is used for climbing. This is not used for lowering down limbs. It is used for you to get yourself up into a tree. Now it also, this knot allows you for safe ascent. When you look on the picture there, the blue rope is tied around the red one. To use this knot, you would pull on the red rope and then you'd slide that blue knot up, and as you would sit back down into your harness, that friction knot would hold you onto the rope. And the way you would use it to come down is you'd grab the top of that knot, you'd squeeze it, pull it towards you, and it'll lower yourself down. As soon as you let go of it, it'll lock itself into place. So it's used for ascent and descent. Now, like all these knots, it must be tied correctly and safely. If this knot isn't tied correctly, there's a good chance that you could injure yourself and possibly death if you're way up high. This works with 12 to 13 millimeter ropes. The example rope I have here today is a 12 to 13 millimeter rope. Also, ½ inch is the standard for safety. Must hold at least 5,500 pounds or 5,000 pounds of strength. So 12 to 13 millimeter rope, which is bigger than like a rock climbing rope. Okay, uses for Blake's hitch. It is a climbing system. There are other climbing systems that are out there. There's a Prusik knot. There is ascenders that you can use, but this is the primary one that we will learn. You can adjust yourself up or down, and you don't need any special hardware. All you need is a chunk of climbing rope, or after you attach yourself to your climbing saddle, you can just use the tail of the rope, which we'll learn how to do that. This is the one primary for beginners. There's some, like I said, there's some more advanced ones, but we will not cover that today in this lesson. Okay, our figure 8 knot. Very strong, safe, easy to inspect. It's good for creating anchor points if you're tying off to your climbing saddle. If you needed to tie off to another anchor point in a tree, if you're using a pulley system or some sort of sling. Now this can be doubled up as the picture shows here. So it's just a normal, like a figure 8 you can see on the inside there, but you can double it up midline to double up the strength of it. So here's our uses. Tying into your climbing harness can be used in rigging limbs, meaning any branch that might be over a house, over a power line, over any obstacle that you're trying to lower it down safely without breaking something or hurting yourself or anybody on the ground. And it's used in rescue applications. Okay, our bowline. This is a fixed loop, showing the example here. You can also do a variation to this, which is called a running bowline, which is the one I would use the most if I was doing some rigging back when I did this type of work. It's easy to tie after loading. And what loading is if you put a lot of weight on the rope and on the knot, it's easy to unhook or untie it. So if I was going to tie the bowline knot, which I'll do quickly, we have the knot itself, and if you were to pull on this, doesn't matter how hard you pull on it, how much weight you pull on it, you'll always be able to just push this portion up here and it'll come out easily. So it's not like a normal overhand knot. If you put a bunch of weight on it, and it's super hard to untie. So that's where it's really versatile. Now when it says must be backed by a stopper knot. Stopper knot is, if I go back to tying this, I want to have a longer tail on the end. Tie just a regular bowline. go through. Here's my tail on the end of it. You want to have a long enough tail that when we tie it, we want to tie just an overhand knot on the back side of it. So we have front side of the knot here, and the back side you can see this stopper knot. The reason we have the stopper knot is if you're working in a tree and this starts loosening up, this knot will come up there and it'll stop it from rolling out, we call it. Otherwise, if you didn't have a stopper knot, that tail could go work its way out and then it would fail and you could have a catastrophe. So here's our applications for the bowline. Attaches ropes to limbs. We use it a lot for securing gear and for doing temporary anchors. And again, this knot can be used for rescue. So let's look at some safety overview. Always dress knots properly. What dressing means is if I'm to tie my bowline again, because it's the quickest one I can do, I'll put the stopper knot in this one. If I just had a loose knot like this, that is not considered dress. That can move and adjust itself. Dressing knot is tightening everything down, making sure everything lines up and is nice and neat and tight. So it's not all super loosey-goosey. This would be considered not a dress knot. You also want to inspect your rope for abrasions. Every time you use your climbing rope or a rigging rope, you are going to want to physically inspect your rope. This is a braided rope. This is 12-strand rope. On the inside you have a core. On the outside you have an abrasion sheath on the outside. So you're looking for nicks, cuts. Now you can have nicks on this and you have normal wear. We're looking at cuts where we're cutting through the outside sheath and we go inside to the inner core. Anything that's cut like that, we would want to retire that rope because it's no longer safe. Again, tie stopper knots when needed. Figure 8 doesn't necessarily have to have a stopper knot. A bowline, we'd like to have one, and definitely when we do a Blake's hitch, you would want to have a stopper knot so it doesn't roll itself out. Never load an uncertain knot. If it's a knot you just you're not sure how to tie it and it's not tied correctly, we don't want to put a heavy load on it. That knot could fail, which could cause damage, or might fail and cause injury to yourself. Also make sure you follow rope guidelines. If it's not an arborist rope and it's not the correct thickness or tight, you might not be able to tie that knot safely, especially if we start looking at a Blake's hitch for climbing. So let's look at some scenarios. So here's your first scenario. You must climb to remove a dead limb and you need an adjustable knot. What knot do you use? What's the best choice? Or why? Out of the 3 that we had. So the only adjustable knot that we did today is our Blake's hitch. That's our climbing one. That is the best choice. We can ascend into the tree. We can get ourselves out out of the tree safely by using that Blake's hitch. Let's look at some review questions and then we'll get on to the hands-on portion. Why is knot reliability essential to arboricultural work? Again, if we don't tie knots correctly, there is a chance for injury, death, damage to property if we don't do it correctly. That's why it's essential. What could happen if a blake hitch is tied incorrectly? Possible things that could happen is that knot could roll itself out and unravel, and the tail could come out, and then you would fall. Or if it's too loose and you don't dress it properly, once you put load on it as you're trying to climb, it will not grab. Which knot is best for rigging heavy limbs? I want you to think back to the 3 knots. The one I would choose for rigging heavy limbs would be your bowline one, because if you put a load on it, it's very easy to untie. It will not bind itself super tight. You'll always be able to untie it for heavy limbs. And how do rope types and diameter influence knot choices? Certain knots can only be tied safely with a certain diameter rope. Also, when doing some rigging work, you want to make sure you have a large enough rope that you can safely do it and you're using the correct knot. Here's some common mistakes that we see: rushing knots, not taking the time, not dressing it, not dressing knot correctly, inspecting your ropes, making sure they're not too worn or have nicks or cuts in it, and you're using the correct knot for the right purpose. You're not using a Blake's hitch to do some rigging. You're not trying to use a bowl on the climb, which you couldn't do. Okay, in summary, we have our Blake hitches for climbing, our figure eights for anchoring points, limbs, or anchoring to your actual climbing saddle. Bowline is a fixed loop, or we do a running bowline, which we will cover a little bit later. And again, practice makes perfect, so we'll do a lot of hands-on stuff in the classroom, tying all these knots, making sure we know how to do them correctly before we go on out into the field and apply what we've learned. Okay, so today we understand the purpose of essential arborist knots, identified when to use a Blake's hitch, the figure eight, and a bowline. We evaluate knot choices specific for certain scenarios, and demonstrated correct tying techniques for each of the knots. So our exit tasks for today, I'm going to hand out some chunks of rope. So if you're in class today, you're going to tie one of the knots, and I'll give you the resources so we can see the pictures and the how-to. We're going to tie one of the knots in class, or if you're not in class today, I want you to do a video of you tying the knot and then upload it and send it to me, the knot that you have selected. So I want to thank you for your time today, and then let's get on to our hands-on activity.